speaking of the question that Jeff Sessions ignored. So as he was leaving out, he was asked a question by the White House correspondent. He ignored that question, kept going. So Sean Spicer actually had to be the one to answer the question, addressing the increase in hate crimes, the uptick in anti-Semitism that has occurred during the President Trump's time. Just 65 days in, give or take a day. So let's listen to Sean Spicer's response to the question about white supremacy in the United States.
While we unequivocally, no question about it, need to call out hate, anti-Semitism where it exists, there is another thing that we have to do. And in your case in particular, while I don't know all of the details and I don't want to reference any specific case, but I think we saw this the other day with some of the anti-Semitic behavior that was going out with respect to people of the Jewish faith, is that we saw these threats coming into Jewish community centers, and there was an immediate jump to criticize folks on the right and to denounce people on the right and ask them to condemn them. And it turns out that, in fact, it wasn't someone on the right. And it was the president from the get-go had said, I bet you it's not someone, and he was right. And yet, oh no, I understand that, and that's saying he's a white supremacist. I understand that, and I think in those cases, there's no question, black and white, we need to call out all instances of this. But that being said, while we're on the topic, I do think that there has been a rush to judgment in a lot of other cases when it comes to, in particular, some of the anti-Semitic discussion, where people have jumped to the conclusion about denouncing people on the right and asking for this. And in that particular case, we saw that the president was right and that this rush to judgment by a lot of folks on the left was wrong, and none of them have been held to account on that. And that is something that equally needs to be called out. When people are charging something of someone...
Yeah, cut them. So anyway... So this is what Sean Spicer does. This is what a press secretary does. This is not Jermaine. This is not just Republican press secretaries. This is what press secretaries do. However, if you're going to use a red herring, Sean, if you're going to use a red herring, at least use a red herring that proves your point. So this is what he did. When faced with a question about the uptick in white supremacy, he deflects and goes to the question of anti-Semitism. The reason he does that is because there is one specific example. Since January 1st through March, there has been a significant uptick in the number of anti-Semitic threats and hate crimes. He went there because there's an example of someone on the left, Juan Thompson, I think, who used to work for The Intercept. The Intercept fired him years ago because he turned out to be, I don't know why they fired him, but it turns out the dude is crazy. I hate ableist language. Turns out that he was not the type of human being that you want working for you. So Sean Spicer goes there because he can use that as a way of generalizing the conversation to make it all a wash and say, well, this is just something that everybody does. And look, this is somebody on the left who did these hate crimes against the Jewish community centers. If you're going to use a red herring, Sean, use one that supports your argument, because there has been 90 confirmed cases of bomb threats against Jewish community centers since January 1st. Juan Thompson, if I have his name correct, he's guilty of 9 of those. 9 out of 90. The rest of them have either not been solved, or they have been people on the right. So 10% of all of the anti-Semitic threats that have taken place since January 1st were caused by a person on the left. Congratulations. You proved your point. Not really. 90% of what's left represents a true uptick in hate crimes and anti-Semitism in the United States. So your entire red herring does not support your argument in the first place. But now let's go back to the original argument, because the original argument is not about anti-Semitism. The original argument is the president going to address the uptick in white supremacy in the United States? And I love what he does there. He says, whenever we have this, we have to address black and white. I'm not aware, except for Clayton Bigsby from Dave Chappelle, of black white supremacists. Right? So I mean, this is ridiculous. This is lazy. This is a lazy retort, and it's a lazy deflection that hopefully everyone can see directly through what he's trying to do. But for those who can't, he is genuflecting as much as he can. He's deflecting, rather, as much as he can to not address the fact that President Trump has not a single time, not once, address the uptick in white supremacy and white violence and white terrorism that has taken place at the hands of people who are Trump supporters. The mosque massacre in Toronto, I believe, 6 Muslims killed by a white supporter, a white conservative supporter of Trump. Didn't say anything about it. You have the examples from Texas and across the country where you have 2 different cases where supporters of Donald Trump were involved in hate crimes. Some have been killed. Some of the people they committed these crimes against were killed, and they used the specific language of "get out of my country." Donald Trump, silent. And now you have this man who went to New York and killed 66-year-old Timothy Kaufman, who wanted to kill black people, and he was upset because he didn't kill a young thug. And Donald Trump is still silent. Now, here's the other problem with Sean Spicer's argument, as well as most conservatives. They try to suggest that this is somehow that this is not really we shouldn't really look at this in terms of blaming the right, because if we blame the right, then we're jumping to conclusions, and we're not being fair to the right, because we're trying to make the right be responsible for all of the hate crimes that take place underneath the banner of conservatism. And that's just not fair. How do you think black people, we'll get to black people in a second. How do you think Muslims feel whenever something happens in the United States? We know for a fact, if they do not mention the race of the person, then chances are it wasn't a Muslim, because if they had, or they weren't from Arab descent, because if they had been Arab descent, or have they been Muslim or Middle Eastern, or if they had a Middle Eastern sounding name, then the news would run headlong with it, terrorism in the United States. This is exactly what the right does every single opportunity that they get. So you cannot cry foul for something that you are 100% guilty of. And not just this anonymous they. This is something that Donald Trump himself is specifically guilty of, making the Muslim community held accountable for the individual actions of one person, even before they know whether or not he was Muslim in the first place. So on all counts, Sean Spicer failed, on top of the fact that he has something, I don't know what the hell that was, spinach stuck in his teeth. On all counts, he's failed. And the problem is that we can see this clearly. But for conservatives, they feel like this is a great example of Sean doing a great job. That's how we know we live in 2 different worlds.